I would like to speak today about the Israeli counterintelligence discipline, theory, and practice. And in order to explain and to give more information about it, and to emphasize later on the current situation, I have to go back to the early days of the Israeli state in 1948. As some of you know, the Israel got independence from the British Mandate in 1948, and immediately after the British left and the formal launch of the State of Israel, we had about 10%, more than 10% of the population in the new state were Arab Muslim, most of them Muslims, which at that time were considered as, I will call it, hostile population, because before the independence of Israel, we were engaged in war with Arab states and also with the local population, the Palestinians between the Mediterranean and Jordan River. And when the war was over, still around 10% of the Arab Muslims living in the state of Israel stayed and wanted to live here. But it was quite complicated challenge for the state of Israel, because there was no clear understanding how much they are really loyal to the new state. And that was the reason why in 1948 the Israeli government took a decision to impose a military regime on the Arabic population in Israel. And this actually lasted for 18 years until 1966. So at this time, at these 18 years, the Arabic population were living in Israel. They were under military regime, as I said, and they had to get a lot of approvals for many activities they have done at that time, because the state of Israel was sure that they are really loyal and that they are loyal and behave as loyal citizens. And in 1968, after a long discussion between the heads of the political parties in Israel and the military, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, a decision was taken to stop this military regime. At that time, these 18 years, the Israeli Security Agency, which is the intelligence agency for counterintelligence, was responsible to I would say, to cover this population and to make sure that they are not become a threat to the existence of Israel. So Israel had a lot of experience in activities of counterintelligence for such a long time. And a year after, in 1967, there was the well-known Six-Day War, when Israel actually won the war against the Arab states around us, and we got new territories. The most populated were in the West Bank, what's called West Bank, Judah and Samaria, what was before under the regime of the Jordan Kingdom, and the Gaza Strip, which until 1967 was under the regime of Egypt. In 1967, the Six-Day War, when Israel won the war against the Arab neighbors, was a turning point for the State of Israel as well as for the ISA, the Israel Security Agency. Suddenly, Israel took control of millions of Palestinians which were living in Judah and Samaria, what's called also West Bank, which was the West Bank of the Jordan Kingdom, and the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. Nowadays, by the way, the figures are that in Gaza Strip there are approximately 2 million Palestinians, and in the West Bank, the Judah and Samaria, around 3 million. So the ISA has to get ready for involved in what's going on in this territory, which immediately after the war became again under a military regime. But the decision that was taken that the military will just be the overall responsibility, while the counterintelligence, mainly counterterrorism activity, will be done by the ISA. Just a few months after the end of the Six-Day War, actually the first terrorist attacks against Israel started from the West Bank as well as from Gaza Strip. And since then, since 1967 up to now, actually, the ISA is a major arm for counter-terrorism coming from Gaza Strip and Judah and Samaria. We have also to remember that during this long period of 50 years, there were not only terrorist attacks against Israel from these territories, there were a lot of attacks against Israeli installations outside Israeli, mainly embassies, consulates, the Israeli national airline, and so on. So actually, the ISA became not just responsible for the counterterrorism in attacks coming from West Bank and from Gaza Strip, but also to take the security measure for protecting the Israeli institution outside Israel. As I said, mainly diplomatic stations, embassies, and the Israeli airline, and the Israeli also shipping national cooperation, and so on. So if you look at the situation, the ISA, if before 67 was more focused on countering political subversion, since 67 the focus is on anti-terrorism and counter-terrorism. And actually, I don't think that there was one day in the last 50 years when there was no terrorist attempt or terrorist activity that from the Palestinian point of view was successful. So it's ongoing battle against the terrorist attacks, when actually the main problem is that it's very, very difficult to forecast who is going to be the next terrorist. And in order to prevent it, you need a very close monitoring of the population in order to be able to get information, intelligence, before the terrorist activity actually has been executed. So this is the history of the Israeli counterintelligence for the last 70 years since the independence of Israel, and it's a major challenge. And obviously, we are lucky partly because, let's say, unlike other countries in the world, they have counterintelligence responsibilities. In our case, also the Judah and Samaria and Gaza Strip are actually surrounded by Israel, and from most of the parts, and these areas are actually closed areas, and that's make it more easy to cover them from with intelligence means. So this is the history. Now there was in the beginning, and we had not just terrorist attacks. We had two major intifada. Intifada is actually an uprising, popular uprising, that not done by as in terrorist attacks when specific people are acting as terrorists. The first intifada in 1987 and the second in 2000 were actually when the whole population actually had like a popular revolt against the control, the regime, the Israeli regime, but it was quite complicated. It took Israel a long time to bring the situation back to a kind of control. And by the way, there was another major event in that time. There was Israel had an agreement with the Palestinian Authority in 1993, when actually at that time it was seen as if Israel and the Palestinians are coming to agreement to split this area for two states, what we call two-state solution, the Israeli state, and next to it the Palestinian state. But because of many reasons that I don't want to discuss now, we don't have the time, mainly because the religious fractions of the Palestinians, mainly the Hamas, who is now, by the way, responsible for Gaza Strip, and didn't accept accept the signature of Chairman Arafat at the time for this kind of reconciliation between Israel and the Palestinians, and the whole thing actually have been broke away, and what we call the Oslo agreements, and they are not actually in practical, they are not exist anymore. In 2002, the Israeli government have took a decision to bring to the Parliament of Israel a new law called the ISA law. The ISA law, the Israel Security Agency law, actually has defined what is the responsibilities of the ISA, what this organization is allowed to do and not allowed. Up to 2002, the ISA would usually act by government decisions and by internal procedures between the ISA and the military and the police. But since 2002, there is a very brief and clear law which defines exactly what the ISA is allowed to do, what it's expected to do, what it's not allowed to do. By the way, similar laws exist also in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, and so Israeli actually took these what was written in laws in other Western countries and tried to build a combination of all of these laws, something which will be good and relevant for the Israeli challenges. So if we look at the challenges of the counterintelligence in Israel, actually we see three major challenges. The most important one is obviously the anti-counterterrorism, which we are involved with it in the last 50 years. So Israel has a lot of operational experience with counterterrorism, not only internally in Israel, but also, as I said before, countering terrorist activities outside Israeli regarding Israeli interests and institutions. The second one is the countering extreme political subversion, meaning that there are organizations that are don't accept the Israeli law, the Israeli Israeli independence, actually, like the Israeli, they are opposing the many of the major rules of the state of Israel, and so they are not like doing any. They are not involved in terrorism, but still they are acting very. We can even say that there are some from fractions, some groups that also are thinking of changing the democratic status of Israel. And the third challenge of the counterintelligence in Israel is counter-espionage, and which was, by the way, very, very major challenge before 1967. And if we look now at really the last few years about counter espionage, we can see a new modus operandi of counter espionage when actually there are states like Russia and China and Iran who are trying to gather information in Israel through cyber activity. Okay, cyber activity actually became cyber activity, I mean offensive cyber activity, became a major activity by countries that are gathering information about Israel. And this is actually demanded Israel to develop a cyber security capabilities, which a few years ago were not existed in Israel. And in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, Israel became quite significant power in cyber security. So if we look now at the counter-espionage and also counter-terrorism, we'll see that suddenly cyber became a tool for attacking Israel, but still the conventional modus operandi of terrorism, like bombs and shootings and other throwing Molotov bottles and so on, it still happens in the area. But we are seeing now a change when the conventional terrorist attacks although many of them are still going on as it was before, it is becoming more sophisticated, and we have to be ready for the countering cyber attacks. And this is, by the way, making the ISA much more technological-oriented organization than it was before. If before it was like the conventional counterintelligence organization as we know them for so many years, nowadays counterintelligence become much more highly technological organization, when still the old modus operandi of attacks and terrorist attacks and so on, he still exists. But we have to be ready for this new tools that are threatening Israel, by the way, as they're threatening many other countries in the world. I would like to say a few words about the control of the counterintelligence in Israel. Usually, counterintelligence organizations are quite strong organizations because they are involved in the internal security of the state. In Israel, by the way, the cabinet minister who is responsible for the ISA is the prime minister itself. That's also mentioned and defined in the ISA law that I mentioned before. And so this organization can be or have the potential to be a very strong factor in all kinds of events that happens in a democratic state. And so the ISA is controlled, first of all, by the government. We have a government controller, which is a very high position in Israel. And this office can do control on every organization, every state organization in Israel. So this is one organization which control and looking at the activity of the ISA. The second one, there is a special committee in the Israeli parliament, which is responsible for overall control of the ISA, as by the way, as well as the Israeli Foreign Intelligence Organization, the Mossad. And inside the ISA, there is organization of control organization, which is not, which actually is independent in the organization, and this unit can look at every activity that the ISA is doing in order to see if it's right or wrong, it's according to the law, according to the rules, according to the procedures, and no one can get involved with them and tell them what they have to do or what it's not allowed to do. They are very, very independent. So actually, if we look at the situation of the control of the ISA, there is quite a good governmental control, as I said before, including also internal control, which is very, very independent. I would like to say a few words about teaching about the academia and teaching counterintelligence in the academia. In many countries, especially the United States, there are universities that have intelligence studies. And among the classes of intelligence studies, there is usually also a class or a lesson for counterintelligence. In Israel, first of all, we don't have a very structural organization for intelligence studies. We have intelligence studies in various universities, but you can't have, like you have in the United States, you can have an MA in intelligence studies. We don't have it in Israel. In Israel, if you want to learn intelligence, you do it usually through lessons in political science or international relations or in government. And up to now, there are only very few universities in Israel which have lessons on counterintelligence. One of these lessons I'm leading in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, when we have a course called Counterintelligence in Democratic Societies, which is for the third year students for BA in political science. And I'm teaching this lesson for the last 3 years. And obviously, it's based on open source intelligence. There are no secrets there. There are not, hush-hush activities in this course. It's all open, and according to what was discovered, what was revealed about the ISA, its success stories, its failures, and we take along. We have a few lessons about the effectivity of the control by the state and by checks and balances of these organizations with other organizations and their cooperation with other government organizations, including courts and the Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Defense. And so it's more to make the students aware that in many democratic states in the world, there is a counterintelligence organization, which is quite powerful organization, and to explain to them what it's expected to do, what it's doing, what's the history, how other organizations, counterintelligence in Western countries are operating, and so on. And I feel that this is quite an important value for the making counterintelligence known and appreciated by the citizens, and not something that nobody would like to speak about, because it is a clandestine activity. Okay, there is an aspect of clandestine activity, but still a lot of what ISA is doing is well known to the population, and we have to explain it to the students, and especially when many of them are looking also to work in the future, to be employed by the ISA when they will graduate from the university. So this is actually what I have to say about the experience of Israel with counterintelligence. I think that we are keeping an organization, a very effective organization, which countering terrorism quite successfully. Not always, you can't be always successful, But I would say that if you come to visit Israel and you see that we are behaving like any other country, uh, and the atmosphere is quiet and people don't feel under a lot of pressure and the security pressure, one of the reasons actually is the efficiency of the ISA, which make things make living in Israel easy and not under security threat. And by the way, as the ISA is so successful, it gives also the government the ability to discuss, future agreements with the Palestinians, not under the threat of terrorist attacks and fears of the population, but to look at this at the situation in a very calm and balanced way, which couldn't be if there was no control of the terrorist activities in Israel. So that's it up to now, and thank you very much for listening.